Have you ever dreamed of instant wealth, only to find it slipping through your fingers? This is the true story of Charles Ponzi, a man who chased a life beyond his means.
Only I found more than I had anticipated.
Built a fortune on lies and changed the world forever with a scam that still bears his name. Join me as we unravel the rise and fall of one of history's most infamous con artists and discover how greed and ambition can lead to spectacular downfall. Chapter 1: Chasing a Life He Couldn't Afford. Charles Ponzi was born in Italy on March 3, 1882. His father was a hard-working postman, and overall his family was financially comfortable, but it used to be much more than that. Ponzi's grandparents and great-grandparents had all been successful businessmen, merchants, and public officials. The demotion to the working class really affected Ponzi from a young age and made him bitter and resentful. He wondered why he had to suffer for his family's failing fortunes. Why couldn't he have been born rich and enjoy a life of leisure without having to worry about a job or money? As a teenager, Ponzi inherited a modest sum of money following his father's death. He used it to enroll in college, as his mother had her heart set on him going to a prestigious college to get an education. But Ponzi had other plans. Instead of studying and going to class, he decided to burn through his savings by dressing in the latest fashions and eating at the fanciest restaurants in town. Then, at night, maybe the theater or the opera, or some gambling at the casino with his wealthy friends. Nothing was too extravagant or too expensive for him. Ponzi liked to pretend that he was just like his rich friends and that he had endless money, but it was an illusion, and one day, it all came crashing down around him. His inheritance money finally ran out, and since his studies had been completely neglected, he had no chance of graduating. His uncle offered him work as a clerk, but the idea of finding a 9-to-5 job repulsed Ponzi, who considered himself too good for menial labor. He felt he had only one choice left: travel to America and strike it rich there. Chapter 2: The Turning Point. In 1903, Ponzi arrived in Boston aboard the SS Vancouver. He felt a deep shame in his heart that he let his mother down and believed that the only way to redeem himself was to return to Italy as a rich man. The only problem was he had no idea how to do that. America proved to be a much-needed reality check for young Ponzi. There was no more inheritance money and no more relatives to bail him out of trouble. As distasteful as he found physical labor, he had no choice. If he wanted to eat, he needed to work. Ponzi spent the next few years up and down the East Coast, from New York to Florida. He worked as a sign painter, a waiter, a grocery clerk, a dishwasher, a factory hand, an insurance salesman, and a sewing machine repairman. None of the gigs lasted long, though. Ponzi either quit because he hated the work, or he was fired because he tried to cheat the customers. This often meant he resorted to stealing or begging for scraps of food and sleeping in parks. It was a far cry from his carefree days as a high roller back in Rome. And even when Ponzi did manage to scrape together a bit of cash, he would inevitably spend it all on a big night out or a weekend vacation to remind himself of the good old days. In 1907, Ponzi traveled to Montreal, hoping that Canada would prove to be more welcoming and lucrative. And at first, things were looking up for him. He found work as a clerk at a bank that mainly served Italian immigrants called Banco Zerossi. It was the same type of job that Ponzi had turned down back in Rome because he considered himself too good for it. But it was surprising how a few years on the streets working for minimum wage could change his perspective. Unfortunately for Ponzi, his new job did not last long because his boss was a con man. Zerossi was using an age-old fraud known as robbing Peter to pay Paul. In other words, he was using the money from his newest clients in order to pay off his older ones. This allowed Zerossi to offer 6% interest rates on all deposits, which was double the average rate. However, his clients started getting suspicious when their relatives back home kept complaining that they were not receiving the money the bank was supposed to send. In mid-1908, the authorities began investigating the bank for embezzlement, at which point Zerossi filled a suitcase with all the cash he could carry and fled to Mexico, leaving his employees and his family to deal with the fallout from his scam. Not wanting to be the one who takes the fall, Ponzi intended to travel back to the United States so he didn't have to be involved in the investigation and fallout from Zerossi's scam. But before that, he did something very stupid, so that he would not have to start from scratch again. He thought that he would give himself a little going-away present by forging a check from one of his bank's clients, a shipping firm called the Canadian Warehousing Company. Ponzi stole a blank check from the manager's checkbook and filled it out for $423.58, a believable and unsuspicious amount, thought Ponzi. But as soon as he tried to cash the fraudulent check, the bank teller easily spotted the fake signature and alerted the police. Ponzi got 3 years in prison at St. Vincent de Paul Penitentiary. But of course, this was just the start of Ponzi's crimes. Chapter 3: Return to American Soil. Ponzi was released on parole after 2 years, and he immediately made plans to travel to the States again, but he didn't go alone. Instead, he took with him 5 Italian immigrants, all fresh off the boat without any proper papers, as he had been paid to smuggle these men into America. Ponzi figured this would set him up with a nice quick payday now that he was a free man again. However, he got caught and was arrested once again. Still, Ponzi hoped that if he pled guilty, the judge would go easy on him and let him off with a small fine. But once the judge banged his gavel and passed sentence, Ponzi's heart sank. He was given another 2 years in a federal prison in Atlanta. After being released from jail for a second time, Ponzi was unsure of his next move. He had come up with all these different plans to get rich while in prison, but they all required money, and Ponzi was penniless. Therefore, with little choice, he wandered from state to state again, working whatever odd jobs came his way. Ultimately, he found a decent position as a clerk with an import-export business called the J.R. Pool Company in Boston. So after a decade and a half in North America, he ended up in the same place where he began. Life in Boston was decidedly better for Ponzi the second time around though. He was good at his job, for a change, and was promoted for it.
And brought them to this country and cashed them in. You got U.S. postage.
Not just that, but Ponzi met 21-year-old Rosneko and instantly fell head over heels for her. The first time they spoke, Ponzi was so nervous that he could barely string 2 words together. Fortunately for him, the feeling was mutual, and the two got married in early 1918. His new married life made Ponzi feel happy, but he also felt inadequate. Even though Rose was content with a simple life, Ponzi had much grander ambitions. Wanted to be able to shower her with diamond rings, fancy clothes, and expensive holidays. Obviously, this was never going to happen on a clerk's salary, so 6 months after the wedding, Ponzi quit his steady job at J.R. Pool and began looking for something new to do. He started off by joining his father-in-law's wholesale fruit selling business. The company was struggling, and since Ponzi always bragged to his wife about being a financial genius, this was the time for him to show everyone what he can do. However, Ponzi was unable to save the failing business, and instead it went bankrupt by the end of the year. Undeterred by his recent failure, Ponzi rented a small office to start his own import and export business. But the world at large took no notice of him. Ponzi lacked the experience and the contacts to attract any serious business. However, Ponzi refused to believe he was the problem and thought that maybe he just needed to advertise his services more. Unfortunately, a few quick calculations made him realize that the costs were well outside his reach. Just like that, Ponzi's import and export business became another failed venture. The only silver lining for Ponzi was this failure had already given him his next idea. When Ponzi saw how much money it would cost him to publicize his services, he thought that maybe he should publish his own trade magazine, so that other companies would pay him the same kind of giant advertising fees. Ponzi had zero experience when it came to publishing, but in his mind, this was already a $1 million business idea. He would call his magazine The Trader's Guide, and he would send it for free to 100,000 companies, doubling the circulation number with each new issue. According to Ponzi's calculations, his initial mailing would cost him around $35,000. But he would make $80,000 in advertising income since he was certain that companies would be lining up around the block to publicize their services in his magazine. Certain of success, Ponzi rented a much larger office and hired 3 staff members. And then he began writing to investors and business owners about the possibility of getting involved with the first ever issue of the Trader's Guide. Then reality came crashing down on Ponzi like a ton of bricks. Nobody was interested, nobody cared about his obscure little trade magazine, and they certainly were not willing to pay his exorbitant rates to get featured in it. Then, when Ponzi went to his local bank to get a loan because he was almost out of money, he got another harsh dose of reality when the bank president refused his application on the spot, telling him that he would rather close Ponzi's account than loan him a single dollar. These were bitter pills to swallow for Ponzi, and left with little choice. He had to fire his staff and sublet his office space to earn some money. But his dreams and ambitions remained as powerful as ever, and Ponzi hoped that his next idea would be the one that would make him rich. One day in August 1919, Ponzi was going through his mail when he spotted a letter from Spain, back when he still thought that the Trader's Guide would become the next big thing in advertising. Ponzi was not content with simply doing business in America. He envisioned that his guide would be translated into French, German, Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese, and that he would expand his business into Europe. And thus, he'd contacted many foreign companies about the possibility of doing business together. And it seems that at least one of them was interested. The Spanish author of the letter requested a copy of the Trader's Guide, and to pay for postage, he included something that Ponzi had never seen before: an International Reply Coupon, or IRC. IRCs were prepaid coupons that could be bought and exchanged for postage stamps in any country that was a member of the Universal Postal Union. They were commonly used by people who sent letters internationally to cover the costs of a return letter when they were not expecting the other person to pay the postage, but for Ponzi, they were a bolt of inspiration and were about to change his life forever. Chapter 4. Built on Lies. Years earlier, Ponzi had learned about the concept of arbitrage, the strategy of buying and selling an asset in different markets in order to take advantage of the price difference and make a profit.